Revelation of A.S.H. Aggression, Suppression, Hormone. The Revelation Night, Book 1. We thought it was a hoax, a Halloween hoax. Vampires, werewolves, those weren't real things. We didn't know the threat was real until after it began. By then, it was too late to save ourselves. For nearly 100 years, they planned to slowly reveal to the public the existence of nonhumans, using fiction literature, the visual entertainment industry, and later social media. The plan was crafted to create societal acceptance of those who were born different. Attitudes were changing. It was working. Then the Pure Human Movement terrorist launched a biochemical weapon during a mid-October blizzard in the Colorado Rockies with horrifying results. The Revelation plan failed in one night, as deranged vampire and werewolf males attacked everyone they found. Nearly 2 million died. The question shouted in the aftermath of the Revelation plan failure was, how could this have happened? The question whispered, could it happen again? This is an introduction to the Revelation plan world. Yes, it is the boring science, history, social commentary part, and you can skip this if you would like. But if you are interested in the motivations of those who felt threatened and the measures taken against the non-humans and humans who carried non-human traits before the Revelation night, you can listen to this. I will let you know that I have taken the Margaret Atwood attitude on this. There is nothing in this book that wasn't done by humans to other humans. We share our world with many strange things, some wonderful, some terrible. Good and evil exist in the hearts and minds of all who can think and dream. Vampires, fae, and werewolves all want the same things we human want. Some are driven by desire to have hope, some to show love and be loved, some to fulfill ambitions, some are controlled by fear. We are all different and yet the same, and that is why our conflict exists. In 1933, the government of the human races made a deal to keep their sovereignty and secure a future of peaceful coexistence with the rulers of the non-human races. Rapid increases in technology and communication almost exposed the existence of vampires and werewolves on numerous occasions in the previous decades. The once isolated homes of such creatures were rapidly being encroached upon by the booming human population. With war on the horizon, the world was divided into two categories. First were those who wanted to live peacefully with the humans, the monarchy werewolves of the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa, the light fae called Angelus, and the covenant vampires of the 4 hemispheres. The second group were those who wanted to subjugate and destroy the humans and other weaker non-humans. Blood coven vampires connected to the Eastern European and Asian mafias, dark fae called demonis, and conquest werewolf packs, a loose consortium of small rogue packs with criminal ties and political agendas. The Second World War of the modern era began. Millions died. The war ended with the use of 2 devices, a weapon specifically targeted at 2 species, the blood coven vampires of the Far East and their demonous fae allies. The rulers of these groups wanted to subjugate and enslave humans, wolves, and covenant vampires. They wanted to control the remaining empires, leading the war against humanity and its allies. The humans discovered concentrated light was fatal to these evil creatures, and found a way to make it at the intensity they needed, using unstable radioactive elements. But the Allied victory came at a great cost. The radiation poisoning that followed in the form of nuclear fallout sickened humans, light fae, and werewolves alike around the world. It was so much worse than the public was led to believe. So a new war began, a war of words and propaganda, a war of secrets and lies. It was its own madness. The humans began building weapons never to be used, lest both sides be destroyed. Decades later, neither side was winning, but a shift occurred in the mindset of the human public. From the beginning, a small group of writers, movie makers, and sociologists created a plan of revelation. They slowly introduced the population to the ideas that not all monsters were creatures to be feared, that they were sympathetic and sentient beings who could be our friends if we just showed them human compassion and understanding. That was how the Revelation Plan was born, and after almost a century, it was working. The vast majority of humans were now accepting of the idea that non-humans exist and may live among us. Yet there were those who worked secretly to overcome our allies, to betray them. Those times when the Dark Ones harmed the human race were not forgotten or forgiven. Those who feared and hated the non-humans sought to find answers and weapons through the emerging fields of medical technology. What they found terrified them. The Human Genome Project was begun with the purpose of mapping the full DNA of a human being, or so it was advertised. Human DNA kits were often offered for sale, day and night, to encourage people to find out their ancestry. The true purpose of these kits was to find out how many humans were infected with a specific set of genetic traits that would allow them to be changed into a non-human. Scientists were horrified to learn almost 86% of the total human population carried at least one recessive or inactive trait of the non-human genomes. Only 14.6% of the global population remained pure human, and so Project Purity was born to preserve the species. To understand their motivation, we must explore what they learned. A pair of pure blood or born non-humans could not produce a human child. However, having one parent who was a changed non-human with human heritage from the 0.8% or 17% group meant that a couple could rarely produce a human child. These rare people made up 0.8% of the human population and carried the guaranteed potential to become fully non-human. Children with one human and one non-human parent were much more common and appeared to be human. The genetic material was spread generationally through the human population by those who weren't completely human. While the vast majority lost the genetic potential of the non-humans, 17% of the human population carried the potential to accept the proper retrovirus, which would result in a partial transformation of their mitochondrial DNA, allowing them to become non-human. They could also produce offspring that would either be human or non-human. These changed ones could produce fully non-human offspring if their partner was a born one, changed one, or unchanged 8%er. Therefore, a born non-human could have a human sibling which could be changed later by giving them higher levels of speed, strength, immunity to diseases, and greatly extended longevity. The advantage of being non-human was outweighed by one thing. Humans could have many children, while non-humans went years and even decades between bearing offspring. Multiple births, such as twins, for non-humans was so extremely rare that it was considered statistically impossible. Many non-human and 0.8er or 17%er couples waited until after they had born children before the genome-carrying human was infected and changed. The recessive genomes were more prevalent in some countries and ethnic groups than others. But just because someone was infected with both genome and retrovirus did not mean they would change. For example, someone who carried the werewolf genome could not be made into a vampire and may die instead, and vice versa. Researchers for both groups were working parallel, and neither figured out which combination of genomes went with which retrovirus, because under lab analysis they appeared identical. The 17%er genome carrier risked death to be formed unless they knew their heritage was non-human and which species their ancestors were. While non-human researchers sought a way to test for compatibility, other groups sought a way to turn it into a weapon for the pure human movement. Many 0.8er or 17%er died in research hospitals and labs run by the unscrupulous. The decision was, let the very things that made them monsters kill them. Secretly targeted programs were put in place to reduce the number of humans that carried the genomes and their ability to reproduce. Some ethnic groups were targeted more than others. Women who were still human but carried the genomes were secretly sterilized during common surgeries, abortions, or routine gynecological procedures for polyps and benign growths. False Pap test results were commonly used as an excuse to do these procedures. An almost undetectable process called ablation, which cauterized part of the uterine wall to prevent the placenta from growing and attaching. Another was tubal ligation, which cut the fallopian tubes. These procedures did not always prevent pregnancy permanently, but they worked well enough that the programs were increased. And as a result, thousands of 17%er women suffered through the trauma and expense of trying to conceive and not being able to, because they did not know a faction of their own government was responsible for their sterility. Flu shots and other routine vaccinations became mass inoculations against the transformational retroviruses carried by the non-humans in the younger generations. Genome-carrying children suffered the most. Side effects of chronic depression, learning disorders, and behavioral problems were considered acceptable risk to maintain a pure human population in the long run, as these children were less likely to have children when they became adults. Food supplies were genetically modified for the sole purpose to be less digestible to non-humans by giant companies claiming the need to mass-produce food for a growing population outweighed the dietary allergies and sensitivities of a few consumers. Then there was the water. Fluorine, while good for tooth enamel, was toxic to genome carriers, and so was lithium, synthetic estrogens, and all classes of serotonin inhibitors. These chemicals decreased the levels of certain hormones in genome carriers and nonhumans that were responsible for aggression, muscle strength, and healing. While trace amounts of these were getting into the groundwater through natural processes, very few knew they were being added on purpose to quell the predatory tendencies of the nonhumans. When it wasn't enough, new experimental drugs were added. They justified it all as protecting the normal human population, but their reasons were far more sinister. Humans were not the top of the food chain, as many believed. And there were those who would stop at nothing to return humans to their rightful place as rulers of this world. And that was how the disaster began. Despite the earnest efforts of those who wanted peace between the species, those who were overcome with hatred and fear proved themselves to be more determined, desperate, and deadly. And we, the civilian population, paid the price. Next, Revelation of A.S.H, Chapter 1.